What would you do if you woke up one morning to find strangers tearing apart something you built with your own 2 hands? Luke Carter didn't have to wonder. He lived it. The sound hit first, a deep, mechanical roar that didn't belong. Then, the unmistakable crack of splintering wood. The moment his brain connected the sound to its source, he was already moving. His coffee spilled across his flannel shirt as he shoved back from the kitchen table and bolted for the deck. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, drowning out everything except the growing sense of dread. His worst fear was confirmed the second he stepped outside. Down at the water, a group of HOA hired workers were hacking apart his dock, the same one he had built years ago, the one where his father had taught him how to fish, the one where he had spent countless mornings watching the sunrise over the lake. And now, these men were smashing it to pieces, treating it like nothing more than a pile of driftwood. Luke charged down toward the water, his voice sharp as a knife. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" One of the workers, a wiry man in an orange vest, barely spared him a glance. "HOA orders," he muttered, swinging his axe into another wooden beam. Luke's pulse hammered in his throat. By whose authority? The worker jerked his head toward the top of the hill. Luke turned, and there he was, Brad Whitaker, the HOA President, standing with his arms crossed, sunglasses gleaming in the morning sun, watching the destruction like some kind of king surveying his kingdom. Luke stormed up the hill, fists clenched at his sides. "You better have one hell of a reason for this." Brad sighed, a long, exaggerated exhale, like he was burdened by the inconvenience of other people's emotions. "Your dock violates community guidelines, Luke. It's unsightly. Lowers property values." Luke let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Unsightly?" He turned, pointing at the 35-foot luxury yacht docked in the community marina, Brad's personal floating mansion, an eyesore that took up more space than 3 regular boats combined. "Oh, I see," Luke said, voice thick with sarcasm. "So my dock is an issue, but that monstrosity isn't?" Brad smiled, the kind of smug, infuriating smile that made Luke want to knock his sunglasses right off his face. "That," Brad said, adjusting his sleeves, "is a community amenity." Luke turned back toward the water just in time to see the last of his dock collapse into the lake with a sickening crack. His boat, now unmoored, drifted aimlessly, bobbing like a lost puppy. He curled his hands into fists, feeling the heat creep up his neck, the rage coiling in his chest like a snake ready to strike. But he didn't. Not yet. Because Luke wasn't the kind of man who struck in anger. He was the kind of man who planned. That night, Luke Carter sat on his back porch, the lake stretching before him, calm and endless under the moonlight. The space where his dock had been was nothing but dark water now, empty except for the faint ripples left behind by his unmoored boat. His fingers tightened around the neck of his beer bottle, condensation dripping onto his knuckles. He'd spent the day replaying the scene over and over, the way Brad Whitaker had stood there, arms crossed, sunglasses gleaming, watching his dock get torn apart like it was nothing. Like he was nothing. Brad thought he'd won. That was his first mistake. Luke wasn't the kind of man to start fights. But he sure as hell knew how to finish them. A normal guy might have fought back immediately, thrown punches, shouted until his voice was hoarse. But that's not who Luke was. He was a planner. A problem solver. A man who knew how to play the long game. And he wasn't about to let Brad walk away from this without feeling the same gut punch of helplessness that had burned through Luke as he'd watched his dock collapse into the water. And then, as he sat there, watching the lake, the idea struck him like lightning. What if Brad's yacht just drifted away? Luke let out a slow breath, the corner of his mouth twitching into a smirk. Not destroyed. Not vandalized. Just gone. It was perfect. Brad's precious yacht, the one he treated like a throne, the one he used to flex his power over the HOA. What if one morning, he walked outside and it was simply not where he left it? No damage. No proof. No easy target for blame. Just a luxury vessel set adrift, floating into the unknown. Luke took another sip of his beer, gears already turning in his head. He knew boats. He'd spent years working as a naval mechanic. He knew how they worked and, more importantly, how to make them stop working. He also knew Brad. The man was too arrogant to assume anyone would ever come after him. That kind of self-importance made people sloppy. Predictable. Luke started gathering information. The next morning, he walked past the community dock, casual but observant. He studied the ropes securing the yacht, noting the brand and thickness of the mooring lines, the placement of security cameras, the distance from the shoreline. He watched Brad himself, noting his patterns. Brad took his yacht out every Friday evening, a little sunset cruise with his business partners and HOA board members, all sipping overpriced bourbon and congratulating themselves on their own importance. By midnight, the boat would be docked again. And it would stay there, untouched, until Monday morning. That was the window. Luke spent the next 2 nights preparing. He rigged a silent towing system, a battery-powered winch with a custom-built remote control. It would guide the yacht slowly and silently away from the dock, pulling it into the deepest part of the lake. No need to touch the boat itself, no evidence, no fingerprints. Just a quiet, effortless disappearance. By the time Friday night rolled around, everything was ready. Luke waited in the shadows as Brad and his guests returned from their yacht trip, laughter echoing over the water, the sound of clinking glasses and drunken boasts carrying through the night air. Brad swaggered off the boat, slurring something about the privileges of leadership, while the HOA board members laughed a little too hard at his joke. Luke clenched his jaw. The arrogance was nauseating. He waited. Patient. Controlled. Focused. Finally, the dock was empty. The neighborhood was quiet. The night was his. Luke moved quickly, a shadow in the dark. He secured the hidden towing mechanism to the yacht, just below the waterline, careful to keep his movements silent. Everything was in place. He stepped back, exhaled, and pressed the button. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, silently, the yacht began to move. Luke watched as Brad's floating empire started to drift, inch by inch, into the darkness. A satisfying thrill rushed through him. Brad was going to wake up to a very, very unpleasant surprise. Luke stood in the shadows, heart pounding in his chest as he watched Brad Whitaker's prized yacht glide silently into the darkness. The slow pull of the hidden towing system was so seamless that if anyone happened to glance outside, they wouldn't notice a thing. The boat moved inch by inch, undisturbed, disappearing from the community dock like a ghost slipping into the night. Luke exhaled, feeling the rush of adrenaline in his veins. It was working. He could already picture it, Brad waking up the next morning, marching down to the dock in his tailored golf polo, only to find nothing, no yacht, no explanation, just empty water where his floating throne had been. He'd panic. He'd scream. He'd call every HOA board member, demanding answers. And no one would have any. Luke allowed himself a rare smile, watching the last of the yacht's white hull vanish into the night. He turned to leave, already planning how he'd enjoy his weekend knowing that Brad would be losing his mind. But then, something changed, A light flickered on inside the yacht. Luke froze. That wasn't supposed to happen. For a split second, he thought maybe it was just a glitch, some kind of automatic cabin light turning on as the boat moved. But then came the unmistakable muffled sound of voices, laughter. A chair scraping against the deck. Luke's stomach dropped. There was someone on the boat. No, not just someone, More voices followed, growing louder, and then he heard it, a woman's voice, light and tipsy, Vicky, Are you sure we have enough wine? Luke's pulse slammed against his ribs. Vicky. Brad's wife. And if Vicky was there, she wasn't alone. Panic coiled around his throat as he watched the glow from the yacht's windows grow brighter, revealing movement inside. He counted at least 3 silhouettes. Vicky and her friends weren't just on the boat, they were having a late-night wine party. This was bad. Really bad. Luke reached for the remote control, his fingers fumbling as he tried to stop the winch. If he could shut it down now, maybe the boat would stay close enough to the dock that no one would notice. But then, a gust of wind, The yacht, already in motion, tilted slightly and drifted further from shore. From the deck, he heard Vicky's voice, sharper this time. Wait, did we move? One of her friends let out a careless laugh. Boats float, Vicky. That's what they do. No, I swear, we were docked just a minute ago. Luke gritted his teeth, pulse hammering. He had to act fast. He turned the dial on the remote, trying to reverse the system, but before he could do anything, Vicky's voice cut through the night again, this time full of alarm. We're moving. We're actually moving. A second later, he saw her silhouette rush toward the railing, her body stiffening as she realized just how far the dock was. Luke's hands shook as he considered his next move. He could stop the motor. Try to reverse it. Hope they'd assume it was a fluke, but before he could make a decision, Vicky disappeared into the cabin. Seconds later, she emerged, phone in hand, Luke closed his eyes. Please don't call who I think you're calling. Then he heard her voice, clear as day. Hello, Coast Guard? A cold wave of dread crashed through him. Within minutes, the situation spiraled out of control. Voices on the boat rose in confusion. Glasses clinked as someone knocked over a bottle of wine. Someone else screamed as they tried to drop anchor, but it was too late. The yacht was already too far from shore. And then, sirens, Luke ducked lower, eyes widening as the unmistakable blue and white lights of a Coast Guard patrol boat cut through the darkness. This wasn't supposed to happen. From his hiding spot, he watched as the yacht, now a floating beacon of distress, became the center of a full-scale rescue operation. The Coast Guard reached the boat within minutes, powerful searchlights cutting across the water. Officers barked orders. Vicky and her friends frantically waved their arms, yelling about being stranded at sea, despite the fact that they were only a few miles from shore. The commotion woke up the entire neighborhood. Porch lights flickered on. Curious residents gathered at their windows, whispering. Then came the moment Luke had dreaded most. Brad. Storming down to the dock in his ridiculous silk pajamas, yelling at the Coast Guard, yelling at Vicky, yelling at anyone who would listen. What the hell happened to my boat? Luke, still hidden in the shadows, let out a slow breath, hands tightening into fists. He wanted to laugh, but he was too busy figuring out how to get out of this mess. And just when he thought it couldn't get worse, his phone buzzed, A single message. I know what you did. Luke's breath stalled in his chest. His eyes darted across the shoreline. Somewhere in the darkness, someone was watching him. And they knew. Luke's grip tightened around his phone as he read the message again. I know what you did, the words glowed against the dark screen, taunting him. His pulse hammered in his ears as he scanned the shoreline, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of who might have sent it. Had someone seen him? Had they been watching the whole time? The Coast Guard was still guiding Brad's yacht back toward the dock, floodlights cutting through the water, illuminating the cluster of residents now gathered along the shore. The entire neighborhood was awake, whispering, speculating, feeding off the chaos. Brad was in a full-blown rage spiral, screaming at anyone within earshot. This was sabotage. He bellowed, waving his arms wildly. Someone did this on purpose. Someone's trying to take me down. Luke exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. The last thing he needed was to look nervous, to do anything that would draw attention to himself. He slipped his phone into his pocket, taking a quiet step back toward the tree line, blending into the darkness. He had bigger problems to deal with. The next morning, the HOA Facebook page exploded. Speculation ran wild. Some blamed Brad's wife, Vicky, saying she and her drunk friends must have taken the yacht out and lost control. Others claimed it was an equipment failure, arguing that a boat like that shouldn't have drifted so far on its own. A few, though, weren't convinced. Someone must have done this. Who benefits the most from Brad losing his yacht? Luke clenched his jaw as he scrolled through the comments. It wouldn't take long before fingers started pointing in his direction. Brad wasn't helping. That morning, Luke watched from his porch as Brad stormed around the dock like a man possessed. He was barking orders at the HOA board, demanding an investigation, pushing his paranoia onto anyone who would listen. Whoever did this is going to pay. He yelled, face red with fury. Luke had planned on enjoying the aftermath of Brad's misery, but now, it was too dangerous to relax. Someone had seen him. Someone knew. And that meant he needed to get ahead of this before it spiraled any further. That night, another text. Meet me at the dock. Midnight. Alone, ***. Luke exhaled sharply, staring at the message. He had two choices: ignore it and hope whoever this was didn't go to Brad, or show up and figure out what they really knew. Ignoring it wasn't an option. At midnight, Luke made his way toward the dock, moving carefully, listening for anything out of place. The lake was still, the air thick with tension. He could feel his heartbeat in his throat as he stepped onto the wooden planks, scanning the shadows. Then, **** movement, ****. A figure stepped out from behind the boat shed, slow and deliberate. Luke tensed, preparing for the worst. Then the person stepped into the dim light, and he blinked in surprise. Vicky. Of all the people he expected, Brad's wife wasn't one of them. She crossed her arms, watching him carefully, a knowing smirk on her face. I know it was you, she said, her voice cool, unreadable. Luke didn't react, didn't confirm or deny it. He just studied her, trying to figure out what game she was playing. She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. Don't worry, I'm not here to turn you in. That made Luke pause. Then what do you want? Vicky stepped closer, lowering her voice. To help. Luke narrowed his eyes. Help with what? She exhaled, glancing over her shoulder, making sure they were alone. Then she leaned in. Taking Brad down. Luke stared at her, waiting for the punchline, the catch. But she wasn't joking. There was something different in her face, something bitter, something exhausted. Brad's been running this HOA like his personal empire for years, she said, shaking her head. You think the yacht was bad? That's nothing compared to the rest of it. Luke stayed quiet, letting her talk. He's been embezzling HOA funds, she continued, eyes locked on his. For years. He funnels money from community improvement projects straight into his own pockets. That yacht? Paid for by the HOA. Every ridiculous fine he pushes through. That money goes right back to him. Luke felt his pulse pick up. He had always known Brad was a corrupt, self-important dictator, but this was worse than he imagined. I have proof, Vicky added. Emails. Bank statements. Everything. Luke's mind raced. If this was true, Brad wasn't just a hypocrite, he was a full-blown fraud. He studied Vicky carefully. Why haven't you exposed him before? She let out a humorless laugh. Because I was stupid enough to think I still cared about this marriage. Her voice turned sharp, bitter. But last night? When he stood there screaming about his boat instead of making sure I was okay? That was my wake-up call. Luke leaned back, arms crossed. So what's the plan? A slow smile spread across Vicky's face. We take him down. The next morning, the neighborhood erupted into chaos. The scandal spread like wildfire. Vicky had leaked everything. Emails, financial records, proof of embezzlement. The entire HOA board, once blindly loyal to Brad, now scrambled to distance themselves from him, terrified of being implicated. Residents who had once nodded along to his rules, paid his ridiculous fines, and tolerated his power trips were suddenly out for blood. By noon, an emergency HOA meeting was called. The same room where Brad had once ruled like a dictator was now filled with angry homeowners demanding answers. Brad, red-faced and seething, tried to talk his way out of it, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, a smear campaign against him. But the evidence was undeniable. The money trail was clear. His voice, once smug and commanding, now shook with desperation as he realized he had lost control. The vote to remove Brad as HOA president was unanimous. His reign was over. But the real humiliation came when the authorities stepped in. As part of the financial investigation, his beloved yacht, the very thing he had torn down Luke's dock to protect, was seized. Luke stood by the lake, arms crossed, watching as the yacht was towed away. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just watched. Brad was powerless now. And then, the final poetic justice. Days later, Luke walked down to the community dock where Brad's yacht had once been. Now, the slip was empty. Just a quiet stretch of water. With a grin, he set up a small inflatable kiddie pool in its place, tying a sign to it that read, HOA approved boat storage only. The next morning, Brad saw it. Luke knew because he heard the scream from all the way across the lake. Brad Whitaker had spent years using the HOA to control people, to make them feel powerless. But in the end, it was his own rules that destroyed him. So, what do you think? Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.